Okay.
You call me an old fellow? Oh, you said young fellows. You call me an old fellow?
Yeah. Well, goes out so there. Yeah, the sun is very small. Very sunny, but it's always like cool and cold.
I didn't realize that was why. Oh. What you see. They got a kind of a high grade.
Well.
All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to have to cut out about 5 minutes early. We got a preschool park play date, so I got to show up. And then some of you may have received the text at 11:45. If you want to hang around a little bit, we have the tefillin belonging to Bar Cooperstein, which is he's one of the hostages, and his mother sent his tefillin to the United States, asking people to put on his tefillin and offer a prayer that he should be released speedily. Morning. So we're actually using the tefillin at the park, and then we're going to come back here at 11:45 upstairs. Anybody who can wait around, we'll put on tefillin, say the Shema, and move on from there. Okay, so if you want a copy of the discourse, it's right here. We're in chapter 3. I'm going to give a brief summary of the part of chapter 3. Good morning and welcome. Give a brief summary of chapter 3 up to the part that we're up to. For those of you that are new here, you can always just show up. There's always something to learn. So I'm glad that you're here. So the focus of the discourse has been on the following idea, that we have the concept of faith in God. And when we know something, or we can know something, faith is not really an appropriate term, right? As we've discussed, if to say I believe that the sun is shining right now, that you don't need to use the word belief. Walk outside and you'll see that the sun is shining. So faith is something that you can't see. So when we talk about faith in God, our souls see God. They see divine revelation. In fact, there are 5 dimensions to the soul, 3 of which live inside the body and manifest themselves in our thinking, our emotions, and in our actions, kind of like a glove, right? Those dimensions of the soul, the human uses in order to interact with these three dimensions of our persona. And then there are 2 dimensions of the soul known as chaya and yechida, which we call the essence of the soul, that remain in heaven and experience divine revelation. And they are connected to the soul in the body through 613 strands, 613 channels, which we are going to reference in a moment, correspond to the 248 positive commandments, the 365 negative commandments. And through these channels, we actually, so to speak, download the divine energy that the soul on high sees, and therefore the soul in the body experiences that. So even though in our consciousness, we're not necessarily naturally in touch with the soul's experience of seeing the divine, but the soul does see the divine. So we can't say that the soul should believe in God when the soul can know God, because the soul actually experiences and sees divine revelation. It's not an appropriate term to say that I believe in God when my soul can know God. That makes sense so far? Okay. But what dimension of God is experienced by the person. So for this, the Alter Rebbe explained that there are two ways that God relates to existence. One is known as Mimale Kolaman, God as he fills all of existence. And in that way, God takes into consideration every creation and every specific dimension of every creation and nurtures it and gives it energy according to its need. So starting in the physical reality, an inanimate object needs a different type of energy than an animated object. A leaf needs different energy than a cow, and a human needs a different energy than an animal. Stanley, do you mind grabbing the door? Thank you. We move out of this physical earth, this physical realm, and we move into the galaxies, right? The planets need a different type of energy based on their physical makeup. And then we move into the spiritual realms. And in the spiritual realms, the angels, the souls, the different layers of spiritual reality needs different types of energy. And that energy is not only for the functionality of the creation, be it a spiritual creation or a physical creation, but also for the purpose of that creation. So humans, you might say, well, all humans should receive a certain equal type of energy. But we know there are certain people that are very energetic and certain people that are less energetic. Maybe you've got somebody who, the Alter Rebbe calls them, he has an interesting term. He says that, and I don't know if this parallels in the scientific world, but there are people who have a black gall and people who have a white gall. And people who have a black gall are usually more introspective. They're usually calmer, more meditative. They're more intellectual. Then you have people who have a white gall. They're much more energetic. They're doers. They're action-oriented, right? So if you take somebody who's a more of a black gall kind of person, somebody who's a little bit more calmer, and you put a white gall kind of energy in them, they're not going to know what to do with it, right? And if they're created in a manner where they are more of this calmer nature, that's because that's their purpose on this earth, right? You don't want Albert Einstein to be, I don't want to disparage Albert Einstein, but you don't want him to be, someone like Elon Musk, okay? Because then he's not going to introduce all of his fascinating ideas. Maybe this is not the best parallel, but we have awareness today around hyperactivity, ADHD, and so on, right? So here you have a person who's got, it's hard to say they have too much energy, but it's got to be channeled, right? They've got this, and some of these people that have this amazing energy do amazing things in the world, but sometimes it needs to be tempered, but that's also part of their journey, right? So we have this in the physical reality, we have in the spiritual reality. So this is God, so to speak, as he shows up in a personal way. For every creation, for every being, God is showing up in a very personal way. And again, even though we don't necessarily naturally experience that, right? It's not necessarily on the top of our consciousness, but God is present. If we're able to tweak the perception, tweak the frequency that we are experiencing the divine, we are able to tap into that. And when we tap into that, you wouldn't say, I believe in God in that context. You would say, I know God in that context. I feel it. I experience God. My favorite example of this is Yom Kippur at Ne'ilah, right? At the end of the whole Yom Kippur, you've been fasting for 25 hours and praying. And now at the end of Yom Kippur, we all feel something. We're experiencing something. So in that moment, we don't have to say, I believe in God. I feel God. I know it. Now, maybe during the rest of the year, it's somewhat tempered, but in that moment, we're plugged into it. So this is all called Mimale Kolam. And this is God as he fills all existence. Then there's God as he is Sovev Kolam, and God as he encompasses the world. In this dimension, God energizes all of existence equally. It's kind of impersonal. God is present and giving, but he's not taking the individual into consideration. That's the dimension of the divine reality that we need to have faith in. That's where we believe, because we can't tap into that. By definition, it's transcendent. And because it's transcendent, we can't actually take it in. So we have to lean into faith, which is where knowledge, where the experience ends, that's where faith comes in. that doesn't mean that we don't make the effort to nurture the faith, to make it more personal. And as he says that in the Messianic era, we're going to know God. We're going to know the dimension of God that today we rely on in the context of faith. In the Messianic era, God is going to be so revealed. The higher dimension of God is going to be revealed that we can actually experience that on the level of knowledge. But our job, our role is to put the effort in to personalizing this higher dimension of divine revelation and making it more personal. And how do we do that? How do we, so to speak, download that dimension? So he tells us we do that through the 248 positive commandments, which, as we mentioned, are these strands that bind us to the divine. So when we do a mitzvah, each mitzvah is a channel that connects us down here with this transcendent dimension of God. And when we do the mitzvah, we actually bring down a channel of divine revelation into our being that empowers us to believe in God. So that's where we got up to last time. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, feel free to ask as we go through this. And he said that we do this through Torah, the study of Torah. We do that through the observance of commandments. And in a general sense, the acts of kindness are called tzedakah. But every mitzvah that we do is a form of righteousness or charitable. We do charity with our own being. We are compassionate on our own being to care for the soul that's, so to speak, in the body. So every mitzvah that we do, because the result of that is we download this divine energy, we are doing compassion with our body. So we have Torah, acts of kindness, and this is the third pillar upon which the world exists, is prayer. Prayer is known in the Torah as avoda. Avoda means service. Typically, avoda is used as the service of the temple. The service of the temple was animal sacrifice. And today we don't have animal sacrifice. So what's the parallel of animal sacrifice in our present times? So he teaches us something fascinating, that the animal sacrifice, there was a common denominator in all sacrifices. And that was that there were different sacrifices. We know there's the Passover sacrifices, there's the unique offerings that were brought on Yom Kippur, there's the daily offerings, the morning and evening offerings, there's sin offerings, there's Thanksgiving offerings, and so on. All sacrifices had a common denominator, and that was the blood of all the sacrifices were offered on the altar, and the fats of all the sacrifices were burned on the altar. What happened with the other parts of the animal depends on what type of sacrifice it was. Some were eaten by the donor, some were eaten by the Kohen, the priest, some were completely burned on the altar, and so on and so forth. But if we look at the common denominator, which is the offering of blood and the offering of fat, we have a clue as to what sacrifices are really all about. And that is that we take the animal drive that's within the human, because the animal sacrifice is just symbolic of the human himself. It's not the animal. It's what, like it says that if a person just brings a sacrifice and they don't have a consciousness in the offering of that sacrifice as to their role in it, then they haven't really fulfilled their obligation. So the sacrifice is basically an extension of the person's experience. So we have passion and we have pleasure. Blood represents passion, right? That's the driving force, the vivifying force within the body. And then you have fat, which is pleasure, symbolically. So what we do is we take our fat and our blood, we take our passion and our pleasure, and we direct it, we sacrifice it, so to speak, in the service of God. Now, how do we do that? How do we take the passion and the pleasure and offer it in the service of God? So that is through a process of contemplation. Let's make it really simple. In a relationship, you love your spouse, you love your child, and that love shows up with passion. You want to do for the one you love, and it shows up with pleasure. You derive pleasure from the relationship. Why are relationships so difficult? Why are relationships so difficult? Anybody? Don't be shy. Why does it require so much effort? People are different, and therefore,
Ego.
beautiful. What were you saying? So when you have just passion and pleasure without God, or when your ego is in the way, the relationship is not about the other person. It's about yourself. I am passionate about you because it makes me feel good. I have pleasure in you because it makes me feel good. So who do I love? Do I really love you, or do I love myself? I love how you make me feel about me. That's not loving you. That's loving me, right? And the reality is, particularly in the marriage relationship, the journey of harmony is letting go of the self. But it's actually not, it's not dismissing the self. It's redirecting the very identity of self to be about the other. I love you so much that I want you to be happy. Not because it makes me feel good. And where does it show up? The proof is in the pudding. When I do something for my beloved that is not comfortable for me, that doesn't make sense to me, that doesn't feel good, but I do it because it's what they want. Probably overly stated, right? Women have a much greater passion and appreciation for those little rocks that are very shiny. It does something to their hearts, and men can't understand, like, why. But if your beloved likes those little shiny rocks, you buy it for them, right? There are certain ways that we communicate with each other. I think it's a little outdated, but men are from Mars, women are from Venus, right? We think differently. So the journey is learning not to communicate the way I communicate, but to communicate the way my beloved needs to be communicated with, because that's what their interests are. So it extends to the relationship between parent and child as well, but parent and child is a little bit different. We won't focus on that today. But the whole journey of a relationship is redirecting the self to the other. That's called sacrifice. So my passion is not about making me feel good. My passion is being in service to my beloved. My pleasure is not making me feel good, but my pleasure is making sure that you have your pleasure. Now let's take this to the soul body experience. In Chabad philosophy, the body is known as the animal soul, right? The animal is not a bad creature. No animal is a bad creature, right? You can have a ferocious lion that tears apart, the deer. It's not a bad animal. It's just doing what it's programmed to do. It's looking to survive. Our animal is just like that animal. It's got certain programming that it comes into the world with. A child is born. First thing, the child is crying, right? For the first couple of years, the child just wants the whole world to revolve around them. They have a dirty diaper. They're hungry. They scream. I was walking yesterday. I saw this little kid walking behind her mother, and she was crying. I could tell it wasn't like a desperate cry. It was like, give me attention. It's just crying and crying and crying. It's like, and you just see here's a being that is just looking for attention. The fact that the mother is pushing a baby in a baby carriage and maybe give your mom a little break, that doesn't factor in, right? It's a non-factor to a 4-year-old child, because they're still wrapped up in the self. What hopefully happens is, as we evolve a little bit and we grow a little bit and we have good parents that teach us, we begin to say, no, the whole world doesn't revolve around me and my needs. I was put here to serve. So yes, I have my needs and I have my interests, but how can I use those needs and those interests in the service of something bigger than me? Those are healthy human beings. Healthy human being is not a human being who doesn't have needs. And a healthy human being is not a person who ignores those needs. That's a very unhealthy human being. A healthy human being recognizes their needs, but channels those needs in the service of other. There's a big kind of a very popular statement that the youth today use, which is, I need some me time, self-care, right? Self-care is very important, but self-care can become another form of narcissism, another form of selfishness. Self-care, I need to be healthy so that I can serve. That's an amazing thing. But if it's self-care because I want to feel good or I want to run away from being in service, that's not healthy at all. So the self, and the reason why I'm emphasizing this is because God created us this way with a body and a soul. And he wants us to use the body to serve him. He doesn't want us to divorce ourselves from the body. The body is the house for the soul. So we need to take care of our bodies, and we need to use our bodies and channel our bodies in the service of God. All that to say that sacrifice, the animal sacrifice, represents this journey of redirecting passion and pleasure to the service of God. Prayer, in the absence of the temple, in the absence of animal sacrifice, which, by the way, prayer, as we know it today, was instituted as the Second Temple was coming to an end. The men of the Great Assembly established the prayer book as we know it today. It evolved over subsequent years, but the idea of formally praying 3 times a day, that was introduced by the men of the Great Assembly, knowing that the temple was going to be destroyed and the concept of animal sacrifice was going to cease. And so we needed to find a way to structure within our own lives a time and a focus to be able to get out of our self-interest and redirect the self in the service of something higher than us. So that's what prayer is. Now, how does that work in prayer? So let's read this part in the text. We are on page 21, which is covered by the staple.
So until
Yeah.
the temple was destroyed, these sacrifices were literally happening there? All of
Yes.
these physical things?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not happening.
Not that I know of.
I read there was a red heifer that they sacrificed.
Yeah, somebody just texted me that on Friday. So in Shiloh, there's a farm there that is breeding red heifers. Red heifer represents the entryway into the Messianic era, because it says that there were 9 red heifers. The red heifer is needed in order to purify, to cleanse people of impurity. And it says that the tradition is that the 10th red heifer, which we haven't had since the time of the Second Temple, is going to be there when we're ready for the Messianic era. And so the red heifer, if there were to be a proper red heifer, that would be an indication that the time is afoot for us to get ready to be purified and enter into this Messianic era. So they're working on it. Okay. All right, here we go. Top of 21. Va'avoida, service, zu karbanis. This is a reference to sacrifice, which sacrifices were brought on the altar in a fire. There's just one other point that I didn't emphasize before. So you have, the Torah tells us there's an instruction to light the altar, to bring fire to the altar. But it says that the fire, when they dedicated the tabernacle in the desert, the fire descended from heaven. So first they brought fire, and then the fire descended from heaven. It says that the fire actually descended in the shape of a lion. So the question is, what do you need the fire from below if the fire is coming from above anyway? The answer is that that's what God wants from us. He wants us to bring our fire, and then our fire meets the divine fire. So we have to activate the fire within ourselves. This fire of passion and pleasure is upon us to activate, and then it meets the response from God. Like in any relationship, right? You can't rely on the other person to initiate the relationship. You need to initiate the relationship. And then the more, like King Solomon says, like water is reflected like water reflects a face, so too does man reflect the face of another man. In other words, when we show up with love, we evoke a response of love from the other. When we show up with passion and commitment to God, we evoke that response from God. When we show up with passion and fire, we receive God's fire. So that's the symbolism of the fire on the altar, that we bring the fire and God responds. So now, v'chein b'tefillah, now in a post-temple era, prayer, shekeneged karbanos tiknu, which were established to replace the sacrifices, Baruch Sha'amar, tiknu Baruch Sha'amar, they established the blessings of Baruch Sha'amar, which I'll elaborate in a moment, upsuke de Zimra, and the passages of song, Lahagdil meduras ha'esh ha'ava shemimata l'mayla, to increase the flame, to increase the fire from below to above. How so? So in the daily prayer, in the morning prayer, we have four sections, four primary sections. The first section of prayer is known as Psuke de Zimra, the verses of song. It's introduced by a blessing known as the Baruch Sha'amar. Baruch Sha'amar, the blessing basically says, blessed are Baruch Sha'amar v'haya elam, blessed is he who spoke and the world came into being. Baruch Omer v'oisa, blessed is he who says and does. Baruch Geizerum Kayim, blessed is he who decrees and it gets fulfilled, and so on and so forth. The idea is that God is all powerful. Where do we see this power of God? So then the verses continue. And we talk about, these are Psalms, the last 5 or 6 Psalms from the book of King David, where we talk about, the verses say, praise God from the seas, praise God from the trees, from the mountains and the valleys, from the sea creatures and the heavenly creatures, the galaxies, and so on and so forth. What are we doing? We're going through a process of contemplation, which reality is that most of us only notice it in unique moments. Summer's a time of travel. People travel. You go out. I've shared this before, that I think the most beautiful places in the world are actually in the United States of America. Everybody's running to the other parts of the world, but if you go out west, some of the most beautiful places in the world are there. My son just went to Washington State, and they went hiking, and it's mind-blowing to see the pictures of. And I took my family many years ago. We went to New Mexico and Arizona, and I mean, the stuff you see is like unbelievable. Grand Canyon. I mean, these are wonders. So when you go there and you see them, you say, "Wow, unbelievable! Look at this nature." But if you walk down the street and you look at a flower, just take a moment to look at a flower. Look at the petals on a flower. Look at the colors on a flower. Look at a tree. Look at a tree. I was just reading an interesting letter yesterday from the Rebbe to a woman who was complaining that she's a Chabad Rebbetzin, and she was complaining that she feels like she's not making an impact. So the Rebbe said, very beautiful letter, the Rebbe said that we look at how plants grow and trees grow. Humans are compared to the tree of the field, not to the plants of the field. What's the difference? So when you plant a seed, a wheat stalk, right, a wheat seed, one stalk comes forth. You plant a flower, one flower comes out. But when you plant a fruit tree, many fruits come out, and those fruits have the ability to then produce many other fruits. So the Rebbe says, and planting grain is a very relatively easy process. But growing a tree is much more difficult. It takes a lot longer to produce. It takes years to produce fruits, right? So if humans were like the stalks, you'd have a legitimate reason to say, yeah, I'm doing my effort and it's not producing. But humans are like trees. Humans take a lot longer to produce, and it takes a lot more effort. So just because you're not seeing results, it doesn't mean that you're not making an impact. You got to be patient. You got to put the time in. Care, love, water, nurture, pruning, and so on. It's a lot of work. If we look at the nature around us, we take the time to contemplate it, we suddenly become in awe of what's going on around us. We look at the human body. Look at the functionality of the human body. I mean, and we live in a time we have such blessing today, the knowledge that we have to understand the physical functionality of the body. The neural pathways, how the brain works. We have information today they never had before, and things are accelerating so quickly. And everything we learn is just mind-boggling, right? And this is our immediate consciousness. And then the psyche, how humans interact with each other, and then look at the animal kingdom, and then look at the mountains and the valleys, and then go to the galaxies. We know nothing about the galaxies. We know this much about the galaxies, outer space. An ever-expanding universe. What does that even mean? Like, you ever think about that? The universe is ever expanding? You get a headache starting to think about that. But we know that the universe, where's it going to? Where's it expanding to? Like, is it physical? Is it spiritual? Where does it end? And so on. Like, these are mind-boggling things. And when we begin to think about the fact that all of this is, for God, is like God just spoke and it all came into being. you begin to realize like how powerful God is. We take it for granted, even if we have kind of an active relationship with God, unless we take the time to contemplate and think about it, we're not going to be moved by it. But when we think about it, we take the time to say the words and think about the words. Right? I think a lot of people have a difficulty with prayer, not because there's anything wrong with prayer, because they're not doing it right. They think that prayer, and it's not their fault. It's the way the religious structure has sucked the life out of it. Excuse me. Sorry, whoever's watching on YouTube. I didn't mean that. Suck the life out of it. It's like you show up and there's this ritual structure that you go through, and then you say, like, what did I get out of this? It's like I just had to kill a bunch of time. But that's not what it's about. It's about being present, like really being present in the prayer and connecting with the prayer, finding the depth in the prayer, finding the meaning in it, connecting with it, getting activated. Let your heart feel the beauty of creation around us. What happens when you get into it? You begin to become impassioned. Your heart begins to beat a little faster. Your body becomes a little heated. You're now beginning to connect with God in a very, very somatic manner. You're feeling it in your body, right? So we're downloading this profound dimension of divine energy into our being. And then what that does is it then empowers us to be a little less preoccupied with self. Or in a positive way, to redirect the self in the service of something bigger than us. Right? Sometimes you hear a good sermon from a rabbi, usually in the high holidays, right? So you get very excited. And when you're hearing the sermon, you might say, either you're very cynical, or you say, wow, yeah, okay, this year is going to be a lot different. I'm going to try to show up differently this year. So in that moment, there's a little bit of selflessness that's seeping through. The problem is that we showed up for the inspiration and we left, and we didn't come back. And we weren't ready for that inspiration, so it had nowhere to land. It was just very surface. The animal actually got excited. But the animal is an animal, and it's going to go back to doing what the animal does unless we are prepared for it. There's a Hasidic saying that on earth that's been plowed and seeded, things grow. If you don't plow and seed the earth, the rain's going to come and you're just going to have mud. Right? So we have to prepare for that. We have to invest ourselves. But when we invest ourselves, we're taking the drive of the animal and we're directing it in the service of God, in the service of something bigger than us. Let's continue, bottom of that page. But when we say Baruch Sha'amar v'haya olam, blessed is he, and the world came into being. Blessed is he who spoke, and the world came into being. Dahainu b'maimer echad. So this is one of the 10 utterances. And then God organized and developed the world through the additional 9 utterances. So in the beginning of the Torah, we say Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So our sages say that was the first utterance. Nachmanides, one of the great commentators on the Torah, I think 12th century, Nachmanides says that God, in his first utterance, created all of existence. But it was like a big mush. Everything came into being. And then God said, let there be light. He pulled the light out of there. Then God said, let there be a firmament, and he pulled the earth and the sky out of there. And then he said, let's separate the waters. And then he said, let there be vegetation. And every utterance that God said, God took out of this mass of existence and formulated all the different pieces of creation. Now, what exactly that means, I don't know. There's some kind of spiritual event taking place there, but for our purposes, God uttered the first statement that brought all of existence into being, which is basically God creating space for something else within his consciousness. And then within that consciousness, within that space of consciousness, God introduced the spiritual worlds, the physical worlds, the different aspects of physicality, the different creations and so on, all to create this beautiful tapestry that makes up existence and the purpose of life. 22. V'chein b'halaluka ki niskov shmei levadei rak hoidei al eretz hashmayim ve'yarin keren la'amiti l'chasilim neisram kreviv k'etzim b'sem shar psukim. He picks one verse from the verses of Psalms, which we've discussed in an earlier discourse. But the idea is, it says, "Praise be Hashem, ki niskav shmai lavade, for His name stands alone." And it is only hoidai, it's only a shine, a ray of God's name that shines upon all of existence. Vayarim karen la'amay, and He lifted up the glory of His people, am kroivai, His close people, etc. So what's the idea here? That creation comes into being. It's ultimately fueled by God's essence, but it manifests itself through a shine of God's light. Let me explain what that means, but before, I'll kind of give the punchline, that everything that we know, all of existence, everything we know about the physical world, the spiritual worlds, comes from kind of a passive shine of God's light. Meaning you have such a profound creation. You have such a profound creation, and it comes from kind of this shine of a light. It's a ray of a light, and yet it brings all of this into existence. Which leaves us to imagine if the power of a ray of a shine of God's light brings all of this into existence, God's essence is far more powerful. It's infinitely more powerful. So we take it for granted. Wow, this is it. This is an amazing universe. This is nothing. This is nothing in relation to God's capacity. This is nothing. It's not even a drop in the bucket. So the specific of the verses, the words of the verse are like this. We have a name. A name, a person's name is like this ray of a shine. If you didn't have a name, would you still be who you are? You'd still be a person. You still have your full body and all your functionality. And by the way, if you had a name that you called yourself, but nobody else knew that name, you'd have maybe that additional identity as well. So what's the function of a name? The function of a name is for a relationship with someone else, so other people can call you. So God doesn't need a name. God is God. He doesn't need a name at all. So what is God's name? God's name is the tool through which He connects with the creation. So the King David says that God created using His name, and not only is it not only His name, it's a shine of His name that's on the heavens and the earth. Right? The influence of God to bring into existence all of creation is kind of a very, very diluted expression of the divine being. And yet, we have this fascinating universe that comes into being, which again evokes within us this awe of God and a desire to want to connect with God and do what God wants. Okay, let me pause because I got to calm down. Any questions or comments on this?
The prayer and this vote, they seem like they are two different total channels, right? Like if you go to the store, things you see, and you can see immediate, the energy, whatever you do, you see life, right? And praying a lot of times it's more like it's something for the future, or raising God or something like that. But they're like they have two totally different things, right? I'm trying to understand what is going.
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, I want to qualify what you said, because I think you're saying that because that's your experience. And I mean that only positively. I think other people have a different experience, and other people find that the actions of mitzvahs are actually very superficial. They can be. They can be very ritualistic, right? And for other people, prayer is very impassioning. So I think it's really about each individual bringing themselves to the experience. The ability to tap into the energy of a mitzvah requires that we bring ourselves into that experience, right? Which is why in many traditions, before you do a mitzvah, you offer this little prayer, l'shem yichud, for the sake of the unity of the divine name and so on, or you make a blessing, which helps anchor your thinking. And for some people, prayer is, like we said, it's just a bunch of words. And for others, it becomes very exciting and impassioning. But there is still something fundamentally different between action and prayer. And let's use the relationship model again for this. When someone you love wants something done, put it in different terms, relationships struggle. And what happens when relationships struggle for the reason we mentioned before, people's egos take over and people dig their heels in and they create this tension between them. The last thing someone who's committed to a relationship wants to do when a relationship is struggling is to stop taking the actions that define where the relationship lives. Put in different words, and I teach this to young couples that are getting married. The classes I offer them before they get married is that you don't wake up every single morning in love. When you're dating, when you commit to marrying, those are very, very loving times. There's a lot of passion. There's a lot of stuff going on. But then you get married, you have a kid or two or three or four or eight, depends if you're Chabad or not. And then life gets busy. And you wake up in the morning and there's breakfast and there's lunches to be made and there's carpool to be done and there's bills to be paid and there's work to get to. And who has time for love? And maybe your spouse said something to you the night before that rubbed you the wrong way, and now you're angry at them. And you wake up in the morning and you're not feeling so much love today. We know that this too shall pass. Hopefully, if it's a good relationship, this too shall pass. But if you say to your spouse, I'm not helping out today. I'm not feeling love today. So I'm not gonna serve the kids. I'm not gonna do carpool. I'm not gonna pay the bills. You're over. You can't do that. You can't stop doing the actions of love. Because love lives in action. Love is all about the action. Emotions come and go. People can love many people in a lifetime, but it's about the actions, it's about the do's and it's about the don'ts. It's about how do I show up in this relationship and how do I not violate the relationship? Where's the respect in the relationship? Where are the boundaries? Sometimes the feeling is there as well, sometimes not. Back to the ego point, when you're not feeling love, it's not because there's not love there. It's because your ego's in the way. It's okay. That's the human condition. Nobody's judging that good, healthy marriages have fights, have disagreements, and people emotionally disconnect. And sometimes we feel our love for God and sometimes we don't. But the commandments, the mitzvah, is God saying to us, look, whether you're feeling the love or not, this is how you need to show up in the relationship. You want to have a relationship with me? Put a mezuzah on your door, put tefillin, keep the Shabbos, keep kosher, observe the holidays, etc., etc. Just because you're not feeling love, so today I can be a thief. Just because I'm not feeling love, I don't have to. I can violate God's laws. No. The relationship is defined by the actions. As we've once said, somebody can say, "I love you so much, but I never do anything for you." That's not love. That's you love yourself, right? A good, healthy relationship is one who loves, and that shows up in action. Prayer is the laboratory where the love gets nurtured, right? So what happens in a good relationship? In a healthy relationship, as time goes on, and we learn how to redirect the self in the service of the other, we move away from needing to get stuck in our ego. Again, it's important to recognize we're human beings and we're always going to have an ego. You can have the most loving relationship. You're going to struggle with your ego to show up in that relationship the way you need to be. But our work is to work on our ego. Our job is to work on showing up with more of the self, more of the essence. And the more we cultivate that, the more we cultivate that essence, the more we cultivate that true part of who we are, the easier it is for us to calm the ego when it gets activated. I've mentioned this many times, the idea that we're sitting in a place called Jeff's Place. There's named after a fellow named Jeff who unfortunately died of a drug relapse. And there's 12-step meetings that take place here and other recovery-related activities. So in the space of recovery, there's something known as a spiritual practice. It's not a Jewish practice, it's a spiritual practice. People who are really committed to recovery have a spiritual practice. What is their practice? It has, there are different, depends who your sponsor is. They want you to have 5 touch points a day, 10 touch points a day, but a spiritual practice. A basic spiritual practice could mean getting up in the morning and meditating for 10 minutes. Spiritual practice could be reading the 12 steps. Spiritual practice could be praying to God. A spiritual practice could be going to a 12-step meeting. A spiritual practice could be being in the service of others. But all of these spiritual practices are about saying the world doesn't revolve around me. There's something bigger than me. There's God, there's service, there's something else. So what happens when you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off and your first reaction is, that son of a gun, like, how dare they do that? What's going on? You got totally activated. Your ego's flared up. But because you meditated that morning, you say, take a deep breath. That person didn't intend me. They must be rushing somewhere. And even if they did intend me, it's okay. You calm yourself down. You anchor yourself. But we're human beings, so we're going to get activated. So prayer is the laboratory. It's a spiritual practice. It's a godly practice where we take the time every day, multiple times a day. And prayer also is when you make a blessing on a cup of coffee or a bite of food, is to say, yes, I want to drink this coffee because it tastes good. But there's more to the coffee than just the good taste. There's energy to be derived. There's nutrients to be nurtured from the food that I eat. There's purpose that I have on this earth. So that when the ego gets activated, we can have a conversation with the ego and say, hey, listen, I know you're activated, but remember this morning we talked about the beauty of God in creation. Remember how we were very excited about the awesomeness of the presence of the divine in the world around us, that we're here for a purpose, that there's more than just the good feel. Let's take a breath, calm down, and we'll try to navigate the situation in a healthy way. That's what it means to be alive, right? So to answer your question, the mitzvah is the action. You can't have, if you pray all day and you don't do mitzvah, you're missing the boat. You're missing the whole boat. It's about action. But if all you have is action, the action is going to be self-serving. And inevitably it will disappear, because we're human beings and we need to have good feeling in the actions that we take. Doesn't mean we always have to have good feelings, but we have to know that there's purpose and meaning in the feelings that we're engaged in. This is what he says in the middle of the page. Shemehem nimshach rishbe eish v'islatus halev. From understanding these verses, from prayer, a person's heart becomes fired up with excitement for God. And through this, as we quoted before from Proverbs, from King Solomon, kamayim bapanim lepanim, as water reflects a person's face, kein lev ha'adam la'adam, so too is the divine face reflected to the human face. In other words, when the human expresses love to God, we activate God's response. And the result of that, this is the punchline at the bottom of the page, mamshech lamata b'chinas seviv kolam. So the higher dimension of faith, bringing back to how we started, the dimension of faith that's transcendent, through this activation within ourselves, we bring that down. Shetia amuna zu, this transcendent faith, or this faith in this transcendent dimension of God, becomes kavua utkua b'leiv v'nefesh ha'adam. It becomes established and fixed in the heart of man, so that we feel, on the level of knowledge we've downloaded from this higher dimension of faith, we downloaded it into our experience, then now we connect with that in a very feeling way, in a very somatic way, in a very knowing way. And again, using the relationship, when we take time to cultivate the relationship, right? When you have a date night and you bring gifts and you spend time together. There's a very interesting, my daughter's getting married in a few weeks, God willing. And in the ketubah, it actually doesn't say it in the ketubah. In the Torah, there are three obligations that a man has to provide for his wife. She'era, ksusa, and oina. He has to provide sustenance, clothing, and oina is understood to mean the marital obligations, intimacy. But the word oina that the Torah uses does not actually translate as marital intimacy. It translates as time. Time. So on an intimacy level, we know that good intimacy takes time, right? You can't have a quick intimate act and that's really pleasureful. It takes time, but it's more than that, right? We tell the young people that foreplay doesn't start at nighttime. Foreplay is a day long endeavor, right? If you want to cultivate intimacy, you don't just show up and get busy. You show up in the morning, you're positive, you're helpful, and so on and so forth, and you care, and it's about time. You have to invest time in it. If you invest time in a relationship, the relationship flourishes. If you think that you can just show up and do your duties, that's not a relationship that's going to go anywhere. Prayer is the time that we give to God, to give to ourselves, really, to our soul, right? We give time to ourselves to cultivate that passion. You can't, years ago, I had a therapist that I would reach out to. I worked with him for a while, and then I stopped working. I thought I had, arrived. Everybody thinks they get there. I've arrived. I'm all fixed. And then every now and then something would flare up, and I'd call him up, and he says, "Look, you can't just call me when you have a crisis. It doesn't work that way. Like, you gotta, this is not a one-off event. You got to work on yourself. You work on yourself, then you can make change. You can't just show up on the high holidays and have an inspirational experience and say, oh, now I'm in love with God. Now I'm, by the way, in the world that we're living in right now with all this post-October 7th craziness, Jews feel very Jewish, but it's not sustainable. We can't define our Jewishness by a feeling of pride or a feeling of isolation or whatever the feeling is. It's going to go away. This too shall pass. And what's the identity of a Jew when we don't have that negative tension coming at us? That's not who we are. We're not a responsive people. We're a people that are connected. We have a rich tradition. We have a rich soul. So we have to cultivate that. That's what prayer is. Prayer is the laboratory where we nurture. It's the gym. It's the gym where we nurture our spiritual connection to God, where we nurture the passion for God, the pleasure for God, and integrate that into our body so that in the actions we can have a little less ego and a little bit more direct. L'chaim. If today is your first time and you're not on our text list and you want to be added to the text list, please leave your name and phone number here, and we'll add you to our Friday texting.